All right, so this little recap, review, discussion, prediction thing is going to be over Barry season 4, episodes 1 and 2, which were both released last night on Sunday. So I'm just going to get into it. So Barry asking Kusino if he's mad at him and telling him he loves him shows how out of touch Barry is and how cold and alien he can be. He doesn't seem to realize that Kusino doesn't give a fuck about him anymore, and that he's hurt Kusino in a very deep way. Barry seems to kind of completely lack empathy or social awareness, and he seems like a true psychopath or a sociopath. So Sally arriving in Joplin and getting all those notifications and talking with her agent immediately and finding out how screwed she is reminded me of the movie Barbarian, where Justin Long lands in Detroit and finds out how fucked he is. So Sally has just been getting more and more emotional and unhinged as the show goes on. She was always somewhat neurotic and quirky, but she almost matches Barry in being a self-centered psychopath. This is just a small detail, but I noticed that there's a jackalope on Sally's childhood room wall. Barry has been looking like he's never slept in his life for a season and a half now. He looks so haggard and like he's just not getting any rest. The prolonged applause that Kusino gets really goes to his head, and we see the fruition of that in episode 2, where he meets with the magazine guy. NoHo Hank's costume in the restaurant is super hilarious. One of the probably the funniest outfit in the show, and NoHo Hank is definitely known for his drip, but it's super funny. He looks ridiculous. So Sally's dad's unrelenting positivity reminds me of Sally herself in seasons 1 and 2. She's a kind of a weird mix of her mom and her dad. She has that weird lack of awareness that her dad has, and she's also self-centered and hard to please like her mom. She also has a certain feeling of being dead inside, like Barry, where she has all this uncontrollable rage and a deep void inside of her that she can't fill. So Sally's dad and Barry both treat her pretty similarly. They infantilize her and they treat her like she's a princess. Sally's mom gaslights her into doing the exact thing she falsely accuses her of doing. She tells Sally, "Oh, you're yelling at me," and then Sally immediately starts yelling. So that shows you how shitty of a person her parents are. I was kind of surprised. People notice this online some, but how would her parents not watch the show before? Her dad, especially, you would think that they would be in more communication and that they would have watched the premiere or streamed it or whatever. It's not clear in the first episode who picks up Barry's phone when NoHo Hank calls him. I didn't recognize the voice on the phone right off the bat, but you'd assume it would be a cop, unless someone else has his phone that's unknown right now. Barry smiling at himself in the mirror and then immediately slapping himself and yelling fuck over and over and punching the wall shows how all over the place his emotions are and how deranged he truly is. He then basically asked to get beat up, also by the prison cop, also shows how deranged she is. I do kind of feel like Barry could be being too psychotic. He's been shown as very unfeeling and lacking in empathy for over a season now. He seems like almost a parody of himself at this point. So then we're going to move on to episode 2, which was released the same night. Sally killing the guy in self-defense seems like it'll come back at some point this season. You'd have to imagine that will be a thing that may get her in trouble. Barry calling himself a child is super fitting. He throws tantrums. He doesn't seem to understand how his actions affect other people. He is super childlike in a lot of ways. I did kind of question if Barry killed his dad. We get some flashbacks to Barry and his dad and Fuchs. I think it's also possible that Fuchs killed his dad. Although Fuchs is shown in earlier seasons to be almost incapable of killing, so I don't know. I think it's more likely that Barry somehow killed him, maybe in an accident, or not. Or his dad's alive, but I doubt that. I think they would have shown him by now. There is the part where Fuchs talks about him and Fuchs and Barry's dad playing army. This could mean that Barry's dad was also a hitman. It could also mean that they met in the military or something, but I think it's more likely that Fuchs was using Barry's dad as a hitman the way he later uses Barry. So those flashbacks showed that Fuchs has obviously been manipulating Barry for almost Barry's entire life. Since Barry was like 10 or 12, Fuchs has been manipulating him. And Barry has described Fuchs as being like an uncle, so that makes the whole uncle thing make sense. I didn't necessarily understand the scene where Fuchs identifies himself as the Raven and gives the other prisoners nicknames. It was pretty funny and stuff. I was unsure of the purpose of it in the larger plot arc of the show. It could show that him and Barry are trying to form a gang in prison for their protection to keep them, safe. That was the only real explanation I could come up with. Cristobal and Hank acting like motivational speakers is truly hilarious. I love that part. It's funny how they use the same kind of language and performance practices as motivational speakers. And that whole shtick of them being motivational speakers is even more intense later in the episode when they're in the private room. Sally really tries to act normal when she visits Barry in jail. I can't tell if she's maybe holding back her emotions or if she's just in an unfeeling place. She does seem a little bit all over the place in how she views Barry. Barry seems like kind of the last person that really cares about her and the last person that will be there for her. And I mean, she's used to relying on Barry. So it does seem like their relationship is going to keep on being a little on and off, a little all over the place. So Sally wasn't talking about a dog, which I was a little confused about until I figured this out. So Sally was actually talking about the guy she killed and whether or not Barry disposed of the body or not. Barry seemed to be pretty quick on the uptake on that one, but that's what that whole conversation was about. I am glad that we got an explanation of why Barry is so obsessed with Sally. And Barry focuses a lot on Sally feeling safe with him. And that does seem to somehow justify, at least in Barry's head, how his past actions. She's a really bad influence on Barry. She definitely enables him, and that whole thing seems to really kind of make Barry feel like everything he's done in the past is justified because it made the woman he loves feel safe. Kusino, if you've noticed, had a bunch more envelopes, so he was gonna put the guy out from Vanity Fair on basically a scavenger hunt, which is super weird and self-centered, and you'd kind of think the magazine guy might have eventually given up, just because, like, why would he do that? And Kusino, speaking of Vanity Fair, Kusino wanting to be featured in Vanity Fair is fitting. The word vanity is in there, and Kusino has always been very vain. And he's shown to be even more vain later in the episode. Barry's hallucinations are kind of like the Jack Nicholson's hallucinations in The Shining. I think that's definitely an influence on these first two episodes. Kusino's Barry impression is hilariously bad. I did see people online comparing that impression to the Fonz. The journalist from Vanity Fair's face is really funny whenever he's watching Kusino. It's like a weird mix of fascination and like he's cringing inside, and he also knows it's a great scoop and will make a great story. Kusino seems to be sweating so much there at the end of his little performance. The only time I've ever sweat that much was when I was in Vietnam during the summer and doing hiking. It's an excessive amount of sweat. Kusino reveals that Barry gave him money to the Vanity Fair guy. That's definitely going to come back to bite Kusino in the ass. It's basically taking a bribe or being paid for silence or something. That has to be a crime in some way. But of course he needs recognition and for the world to know that he's supposedly a hero. There's no way that him revealing all that stuff will remain confidential. Who else would know all that stuff about Barry and Kusino? He's the only real source that they could have other than Kusino's girlfriend's dad, which I don't, they've already kind of gone over how he's not going to talk to the cops. So it's definitely going to come back to bite Kusino in the ass. NoHo Hank's relationship with Barry is truly all over the place in this episode. He goes from wanting to break him out of prison to wanting to kill him. And at first he's super concerned about Barry, and then at the end he wants to kill him. So now I'm going to get into predictions. So it's revealed that Barry has siblings because it says that he's the youngest sibling, the youngest son, the youngest kid. That should come up later in the season, either as part of Barry's backstory or as maybe his siblings will be characters in the present day. I do think we'll get to know a lot more about Barry's life before he joined the military. Perhaps why he joined the military, which has been already kind of explained, I think. But I do think we'll get kind of some insight into the source of his madness, perhaps. Um, yeah, like I have it written down. Yeah, stuff about Barry's family will probably help explain why he's such a psychopath. Barry says that in the witness protection program, the that whole thing that he wants to take someone with him. They obviously are trying to make the audience think of Sally. That's pretty obvious. But I think he'll take Fuchs with him. I think that him and his connection to Fuchs is one of the mainstays of the show, and he doesn't seem to be able to conquer Fuchs' influence over him. I think Fuchs will try to stop NoHo Hank from trying to kill Barry. I think that will be a whole thing, and maybe the gang that Fuchs tries to make will end up being some type of like prison gang that fights whoever is trying to kill Barry. Um, so I think Barry could very well die this season. I kind of doubt it, but I think it's possible that maybe he dies in episode 7 or 8. I think it'd be more likely in episode 7 than in episode 8, but I think that's perhaps on the table. I also think that Sally's parents will come back at some point in this season. I think we'll see them again. I do think that Sally will find some way to be at least moderately happy and successful by the end of the season. I think she's going to get a redemption arc. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I do think that she's going to maybe break out of her old ways and not spiral like Barry has done. I also don't think that the gang alliance put together by Cristobal and NoHo Hank, that can't last. Those different gangs liking each other and not fighting. They will be back to warring with each other fairly soon, I'd say, within an episode or two. I think that's going to blow up in their faces. And I don't think that Cristobal and NoHo Hank will end up together or end up happy, either of them. There's no way they end up together. I think one of them has to die or something has to happen to break them up. I mean, they've already experienced some conflict over NoHo Hank's relationship with Barry, so there's no way that that's going to last the whole season, their happiness. Yeah, either Cristobal. I don't think NoHo Hank will die. I have seen some stuff online about there being a NoHo Hank spinoff, which I doubt. But I think Cristobal might die, or something's going to push him and NoHo Hank apart. Yeah, so that's it. I'll be doing weekly episodes about these Barry episodes, so please like and please subscribe. Thanks.